All right, today we're jumping into a story that's literally carved in stone. It's a tale of art, empires, and religion that stretches across continents and thousands of years, the Amaravati marbles.
So let's get right to it. The big question, the mystery at the heart of all this. Take a good look at this ancient sculpture of the Buddha from India. Does something seem a little unexpected? Why on earth does this deeply Eastern spiritual figure look, well, kind of Greek?
So, how do we even begin to answer that? Well, we've got to start with the objects themselves. And believe it or not, the first clue is hiding right there in their name.
Okay, so here are the quick facts. This is the Amaravati collection, over 120 sculptures that came from this incredible place called the Great Stupa in India. Now they're in the British Museum. For a long, long time, people called them the Elliott Marbles. But here's the first twist in our story. They're not marble, not at all. They're actually made of limestone. And that little detail, oh, it's just the tip of the iceberg.
Now, to really get why these sculptures are such a big deal, we need to rewind a bit. Because before they were made, showing what the Buddha looked like, well, it was a very complicated issue. In fact, for a long time, there was a Buddha without a face. You see, for centuries, early Buddhist art had a rule, a very important one. You did not show the Buddha as a person. It was seen as disrespectful. So instead, they used symbols to represent him. You'd see an empty seat, or maybe his footprint, or a wheel to symbolize his teachings. But you'd never see him. And then, bam, everything changes. It's this total revolution in religious art. All of a sudden, the Buddha has a face, a human form. It's the birth of what we call anthropomorphic art in Buddhism. This older way of doing things, the whole no human forms rule, it has a name, aniconism. It's all about representing these huge spiritual ideas with symbols instead of pictures of people. And it usually comes from a place of really deep respect. And you have to get this concept to understand just how absolutely radical it was to suddenly say, hey, let's carve the Buddha to look like a person. So what happened? What could possibly spark such a massive shift? Well, the answer is what happens when two totally different, powerful cultures collide. Which brings us to our next section, when Greece met India. Okay, let's set the scene. It really all kicks off way back in the 330s BC. Alexander the Great charges east. And he doesn't just bring an army, he brings Greek culture, what we call Hellenistic culture. Fast forward a few centuries, and you get these amazing kingdoms, the Indo-Greek and Kushan empires, right in the area of modern-day Afghanistan and Pakistan. And this place, it becomes this incredible cultural melting pot. It was just the perfect storm for brand new ideas and brand new art to be born. So what was the Greek contribution to all this, artistically? I mean, what was their secret sauce? Well, they were masters of what you'd call idealistic realism. Their statues looked so lifelike. They perfected these natural-looking poses, that gentle S-curve a person makes when they stand. It's called contrapposto. And they were just wizards at carving realistic, flowing robes and that iconic curly hair. So when the artists in this region, called Gandhara, decided to take that huge leap and create the first ever statues of the Buddha as a person, where do you think they looked for inspiration? Yup, they looked right at the Greek style. And what they created was just stunning. A figure with this calm, realistic face, wearing a robe that looks a lot like a Greek toga, it managed to look completely human and totally divine at the same time. So what you end up with is this amazing shared artistic DNA. You can literally see it. You've got the realistic faces, that natural contrapposto stance we talked about, the robe, which is pretty much a Greek garment called a himation, and of course, the stylized curly hair. It goes even deeper. They even used figures like the Greek hero Heracles as a template for Buddhist protector gods. It's a true fusion, through and through. And this mind-blowing artistic blend, it wasn't just some theory or abstract idea. No, it was literally carved into stone at one of the most spectacular sites in all of southern India. And that, of course, brings us right back to where we started, with our sculptures and the story of the Great Stupa. Just try to picture it, this massive, monumental structure, gleaming white under the Indian sun. And it's covered, completely covered, in these incredibly detailed limestone carvings. The Great Stupa at Amaravati, it wasn't just architecture. It was like a giant 3D storybook. The artists used this brand new revolutionary Greco-Buddhist style to tell the Jataka tales, which are these ancient stories about the Buddhist past lives. It was a way to make these old Indian stories come alive for everyone, using this amazing new visual language that was understood across cultures. But believe it or not, the story of these sculptures doesn't stop there, not by a long shot. In fact, you could say their most dangerous journey was still ahead of them. The trip these carvings took from India is, wow, it's a whole epic story in itself. It starts in 1845. They're dug up by a British official, Sir Walter Elliot. Then they get shipped to Madras, and from there all the way to London. But here's the thing, for decades, nobody treated them like priceless art. They were treated more like, well, cargo. They got stashed in some building called Fife House. At one point, they were just left in a warehouse, totally exposed to the miserable London weather. It wasn't until 1992, think about that, almost 150 years after they left home, that they were finally given a proper, safe, climate-controlled gallery in the British Museum. And this quote from back in 1868, it really just says it all. A guy named James Ferguson wrote that the conditions were, and I quote, less than ideal, and that the pieces sustained some damage there due to weather conditions. I mean, talk about an understatement. These things had survived for almost 2,000 years, and now they were just being left out to crumble. It's kind of shocking, really. So let's just put this into perspective for a second. Think of their entire lifespan. For something like 1,800 years, they were part of the stupa in India. Then, for the next 150 years or so, they were being shipped around and stored terribly, and that's when a lot of the damage happened. The time they've actually spent under modern, careful museum conservation is just a tiny little sliver at the very end of this long, dramatic history. Okay, so after all of that history, all of that travel and neglect and rescue, what do these stones actually represent today? That brings us to our final section, the legacy in limestone.
Today, there are 120 of these sculptures that make up the collection at the British Museum. And every single one of them is like a silent witness to this huge, incredible, sprawling history we've just been talking about.
So when you look at these limestone carvings, you're seeing so much more than just old artifacts. You're seeing a really specific, unique moment in time where Greek ideas about realism crashed into Indian spirituality. You're looking at the very birth of the Buddha's human image in art, a style that would spread and influence art all across Asia for centuries to come. And of course, they tell a much more complicated story too, about colonial-era digging and collecting and that long, sometimes really rough journey that objects take to end up in museums. And finally, they're just this powerful reminder of why modern conservation is so absolutely crucial for protecting our shared world heritage.
Which kind of leaves us with one last question to chew on. These pieces of limestone, they tell this epic story of cultures blending, of empires rising and falling, and just incredible survival against the odds. It really makes you think, doesn't it? What other stories are all those objects in museums telling us that go way beyond what's just printed on the little label next to them?